Yeah, they got really quiet. They're being polite. Nice little dogs.
Should've just did this on take one.
Yeah, but you know what? They say third time's a charm.
On today's episode, we find answers to age-old questions such as, are werewolves real? Are cops incompetent? Is writer, director, actor Jim Cummings good at what he does? And are the real monsters just stress, paranoia, and bottled up emotions inside of us just waiting to explode in a series of hysterical meltdowns? For all things that make you feel sad, bad, and just generally not rad, this is Existential Shred.
So, what did we watch this week?
We watched Jim Cummings' 2020 film, The Wolf of Snow Hollow, which is labeled as a horror comedy movie.
Yeah, the horror is definitely, I would say, more like surrounding the situation, because it's not scary, I would say.
No.
But the situation everybody finds themselves in is like the horror. Like the first scene, people drew parallels to something like Scream. Like it's very much like a typical, I almost said Thrasher movie. It's got a lot of Metallica inspiration. But a typical slasher movie establishing two characters, outsiders to the town, Brienne and PJ, and go to a local bar. They are wearing all white, so we know they're going to die immediately. PJ gets into an argument with a local and kind of calls him out for using a slur. They get into a fight with the locals, and immediately they're on edge, and they're like, oh, they're going to kill us. Little did they know what would actually kill them, or kill Brienne, at least.
Might be a werewolf.
Might be a werewolf.
Yeah.
Full moon. They're hanging out in a hot tub. PJ goes in to take a shower. She stays behind to turn off the hot tub water, and
She never comes back in.
never comes back in. Police are brought on. They find bite marks, claw marks, and gray wolf hair.
Paw print also.
And a
Yeah.
paw print. And this is where you really meet all the main cast. Hadley, the sheriff, who ends up being our main character's dad. You meet John, our main character, who is also...
It's Jim Cummings.
That's what it's Jim Cummings.
You first meet him in the AA program. Like, before he even gets to the scene, he gets to the scene of the crime. Him being like, yeah, it's a meeting, and he says some pretty funny things, and like, to kind of allude to, like, he was talking about, I used to drink, I get angry, I don't deal well with anger, and...
Yeah, and he keeps saying weird stuff, and there's also one of the things that I called it at 33 minutes and 29 seconds. I was like, I know exactly who it is. I was wrong.
No, okay.
But there's
You called it.
It goes along with kind of all these little weird things he keeps throwing out. Is Jim Cummings has really sharp teeth.
He does. It does.
I was like, that's After Effects. He's the wolf. But I was wrong.
No, that's just how he looks.
Yeah, it turns out even though he has a lot of anger problems, he is a recovering alcoholic, and then not so much a recovering alcoholic, just kind of a in progress alcoholic.
Like, as they start going into things too, like, he's also, like, as much as he is like this person who has extreme anger issues and issues with alcoholism, he's really one of two people in the movie that are the only voices of reason.
Yeah, because kind of like The Witch, you see the monster in the first 10 minutes. And as the audience, you have to go, okay, I saw the thing everybody's afraid of, but now if the main character is saying it's not real, there's like an internal conflict as an audience member where you're like, and watching this movie, having watched like Thunder Road and kind of having an understanding of what his Jim Cummings like MO is, I was like, all right, well, we see the monster almost immediately, but is this like a metaphor? Like, is it really there? Is it a metaphor? Like, is it going to be just like symbolic of someone's inner demon coming out and it's actually a person? Being able to watch it, I'm like, all right, I don't really know what to expect.
When we do see the werewolf in this film, I like some of it looks kind of CGI. It also, I definitely know there's parts where it's a guy in a suit. Like, there's practical effects probably mixed with CGI, but like the werewolf is like towering over people. Like even when you first see it, it's like crouched and it's as tall as the girl that it's about to kill.
Yeah, and that was one of the things is as I was as I was kind of watching it, I was like, all right, is it real? And then I was like, well, like it's bigger than the car. It's bigger than all these like other people. You see it comparative to a lot of things. You just see it outright. And I was like, all right, this is a tough sell. How is this thing this big and a metaphor for something? But after the first murder, get the establishing of a handful of characters. Again, if we're talking about genre, I would say not really a horror movie. It's also black comedy,
Yeah.
but kind of. It is funny. I think it was a very funny movie. It's more kind of situational.
It's a very much blend of things, like the horror aspect because of the setting and everything that's going on in the town. Mystery, the cops are trying to solve murder cases through it, and comedy. But then there's also this like a lot of other elements too, just like family drama. Like
Yeah.
his dad, who's the sheriff, is on his way out, not just because he's old and retiring, but he's like his health is failing entirely, which is causing more stress on the main character, John. And then you have the issues with the ex-wife and his daughter, who's about to go to college, who she just is like, you're not present. Like when we first are actually introduced to her, she's hounding him about going to her orientation for college.
That's one of my favorite parts of the movie. It's not supposed to be funny, but it is very funny. Is they're in the diner, and his ex-wife is yelling at him, and he's just like, "Oh, geez, calm down. We're not going to do this in the middle of whatever it's called." He's like, "How much coffee has you had?" And then he's just outright ignoring his daughter, and she's just like, "Hey, Dad," and he's just like, "Yeah, I'll have a coffee."
Yeah.
But he is definitely a character that has a lot of stress. He's watching his daughter grow up and leave while kind of probably coming to terms with the fact that he hasn't been a great dad. At one point in the movie, she just says, "I've been staring at the back of your head for 17 years."
Yeah. That happened in like Thunder Road as well, where like that was very much a family drama movie, as well as being kind of a black comedy. But like the fact that he's like not a good father, and it seems again like there's two ways that like he's trying to make up with it. He's like trying to be like, "Yo, well, yeah, until she goes to college, she should come live with me." And now there's murder, like a murder that happened. They haven't found the guy, and it was a younger girl. So he's like, "Well, she'll definitely be safer if she comes and stays with me. I'm a cop. Like, she'll be safe here."
Yeah, it's so funny. Is the ex-wife is like, "Why would she stay down here? She should stay up with me." And he's like, "Well, I don't know. I think she'll be safer with me on account of the brutal murder." And it's just like, hold on a sec. Let's think about that.
Yeah.
So their first murder happens. There's this weird establishing like, okay, there might be a werewolf, or it's a person. Not Jim.
John.
Jim playing John is the voice of reason. They, right after the first murder happened, the four main cops are in a diner, and they're talking about how this would have happened. And they're trying to figure out like, okay, well, he couldn't have snuck up from behind the house because there's no car, there's no footprints, it's all animal tracks. And they're talking about how it would have happened. All of three of them are basically saying it has to be a wolf or it has to be a bear. And John's just like, "No, this is crazy. It's a man. He's trying to make it look like a serial killing."
Yeah.
And it's just established very early on, like, okay, this is kind of the voice of reason. Everybody else is being a little irrational. And with that, there's also the idea of like expectations, where it's like the expectation in that regard is like, the cops should take this seriously. They shouldn't fall prey to superstition and people's hysteria. And then he's the voice of reason and like the stress that comes with something like that.
And the only other like cop in the whole movie that's like, again, the voice of reason is Julia Robson. She just seems like, I do think that John is a good cop. Like he picks up on things a lot that like other people don't. And then Julia is a good cop, or Jolie. She like is a good person, like very like wholesome of a character. Also, like even like after the first murder and they are investigating, they encounter the two guys that they almost got into a fight with, And like she's just being nice and talking to him, and they're like, oh yeah, and then we went here, and the one guy's like, oh yeah, show her the receipts. He's like, oh yeah, take a picture of all my receipts. He's like, he hands her the phone, and then he goes, don't go left. And then immediately as she like goes one other picture, he goes, wait, do you have a warrant? And like just becomes like it's such a turn too, because like he was like so like willing to be like, oh yeah, here. And then the moment like in his brain, he's like, I shouldn't have done that. But then she's walking away. He's like, if you get a warrant, I'll be happy to show you everything on my phone. She's walking away, and you just hear him go, bitch. Like,
Yeah, which now we have to be suspicious of this guy.
yeah.
After those handful of scenes, we're introduced to another character, a ski instructor, who I feel like the reason you pick this movie is because when she's talking, they're establishing her character. She's talking to a bunch of kids who she's instructing for skiing, and the kid that she picks on, his name is Jordan.
That's not. When I picked this movie, I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, she just goes, oh, it's just snow. The worst that'll happen is you fall on your butt. And he's like, and it'll hurt. And she's like, Jordan, believe it or not, I once sucked worse than you did. And as I was watching that, I was like, oh, thanks, Levi. That's fine. But yeah, they stick with her a little. It is a full moon. And this is where we first see the werewolf proper.
It goes from its crouched like stance to standing fully tall, and it's just like you're like, holy shit, that thing's big as well.
Yeah, and rips her arm off, kills her,
removes her head.
Yeah, removes her head. We don't see that happen.
No,
but at the crime scene, so next shot is daytime. They are responding. The cops, all of our main cast, is responding to the murder, and her head's missing, and John is not holding it together well.
No. The humor a lot of times is, in my opinion, is like how he is reacting to a lot of things. And he starts losing it at this point. Like, again, these happen a full moon apart. So that's about a month. Hasn't found the killer. Another one happened. At that point, too, he's kind of like feeling like a little bit of responsibility for not having found the killer. But there's people there that aren't supposed to be there. The news is there, and there are people who are supposed to be there that aren't there. The forensics is just literally, they're playing a telephone game with forensics and another squad car. And he's trying to get information from those cops, trying to tell other people to get the news out of there. And in the ensuing, like, just ridiculousness of everything that's going on, the squad car yells something to him. And he goes, what? I can't hear you. You need to speak louder. And the one cop, Bo, stands up and just screams, they're saying it's a wolf. You see just him slowly turn and look at the newsman that's still there, and their window go up. And he's just furious.
Yeah, he's like, hey, Bo, come here a sec. And he takes him to the woods to fight him.
There is some definite violence in this movie, but the instances where he is, I'm going to say, attacking somebody else are so silly and funny that to me it reminds me of like Wes Anderson violence, because Wes Anderson, anytime he puts violence in his movies, it's like just the silliest little
it's
conflict.
not like a visceral thing. It's like the characters don't know what to do with themselves, so it's like a child.
Yeah, he takes him out in the woods and slaps him in the head, knocks his hat off, and then pushes him away.
He has such big emotions, and the only way he can get it out is physically. I think the funniest lines, which like speaks to John's character, I on the third page of my notes, I gave him the title John the Unseen and Unheard. In this scene, second murder occurs. He's trying to figure out like how to keep everyone off his back. They're saying it's a wolf. They're saying it's another animal attack, and he's just like, it's a man. When do I get to be right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's so funny because like he talks about in his establishing scene, he's in AA, like we talked about. And the thing he talks about is like he dreams about taking a backhoe to his ex-wife's house, and he just goes, not to hurt anybody, but just to be seen.
He says to put it in drive and just let it drive through. I'm just like, yeah, but just somebody will notice me.
It fits his character so well because he is the voice of reason. He's the only one who's like, it's a man. This werewolf talk is ridiculous. That's such a funny little quip he throws out.
He has such quick like retorts a lot of times that are just like so quick and funny. And one of my favorites in general is he calls and asks for like, do you have any like records of who went to the school? And like clearly on the phone they're like, oh, is this investigating the murder case? He's like, no, we're actually investigating a completely different crime that involves arsonist that keeps burning the cars of people who are nosy.
Yeah.
And it's in his decline also, just like he's spiraling back out of control. He's under a ton of stress. His father is, again, his health is failing. Daughter grown up. He's like been groomed to be the next sheriff as well, but he's kind of unlikable in a sense. I don't want to say completely unlikable.
It's not that he's unlikable. It's just in the moment of the slice of life that we're seeing him in,
Yeah.
he cannot, it's something he can't take on.
Yeah.
His dad is in poor health, which I didn't know this. The actor who plays Robert Forster, the movie's dedicated to him. He died.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Pretty sure he actually passed before the film came out. I don't think it was his last one. I think this one just took longer in post-production than...
I guess he had worked with the producer of the film previously, and he decided to take it because he saw it as a dramatic movie about a father-son relationship, and especially about like declining health and death. That is part of it, and like especially what he was going through at the time.
Yeah.
Like it's morbidly, it's interesting.
Another one, and going into like the whole father-son thing, like one of the other funniest scenes is it's after the second murder, whenever he goes in and he just has like the EMT checking him out, and he's like, what's going on? He's like, it's not like he didn't tell anybody about like how bad his health is. People just know he's aging. And he's like, it's nothing, like, blah, blah, blah. And like, he looks at the EMT, and the EMT's just like, I gotta do the right thing. He has a heart murmur. And Robert Forster's character just goes, he's not a real doctor.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, like, you get the idea that something's wrong with him, but that's the first time they're like, oh, it's serious. Like, it's something that shouldn't be. And he's like freaking out. He's like, go work from home. No one cares that you're here. Just go work from home. The deceiving thing about the movie is it is so subtly funny, but then it has these moments where it just complete 180. And this is one of those scenes. So yeah, second murder has occurred. All this is going on. Everybody's stressed out. His dad has a heart murmur, and he has this really like touching scene where he's just like, every time I get a call at night, I imagine it's someone calling to tell me you died, and I can't handle that anymore. Just retire. Go to the hospital right now. And his dad's just like, no.
They even mentioned, he's like, talks about like, oh, we're the old guard. It's impossible to make us retire. He's like, Willie Nelson's still up on stage playing guitar. He's like, yeah, but he's playing guitar. He's not doing police work. Like, this is bad for your health.
Speaking of things that are bad for your health, I think right after the second murder, you start to see him return to drinking.
Some of my favorite shots in this, and like the first time you see it, I didn't even think anything of it. He's at the funeral of the second one, and it's like cutting to just like a shot of his microwave and like the cabinet above it. You're like, what's going on? It's very like weird, like I don't want to say like it's like more like something you'd see in like a psychological thriller, or just like these weird cuts. You find out later that he's like left like 1 6-pack of beer up and like tucked away in the cabinet above his microwave. In these moments when he's dealing with all this, all he can think about is just like, I want to go drink those beers. One of Jim Cummings' favorite directors is David Fincher, who's known for Fight Club and Zodiac and Seven, the movie Seven. He loves those kind of like mystery, like odd ball kind of like thriller movies. And he said like going from doing Thunder Road and this being kind of a bigger production than what Thunder Road was, he's like, I didn't feel like they were going through a company and actual distributor this time, but he's like, I didn't feel like I could just do like weird, like cut to a different scenes. He's like, I was thinking more of like blending everything kind of like a music video, which like you'll start to see some scenes in this movie. It doesn't quite end as it blends into the next scene. And I think in this movie, what has like really kind of stepped up his cinematography in general with this, because some of the shots are just great. Even like cuts in the scenes where there's he's pouring coffee and it like looks in the coffee cup, and then you see in the coffee cup like a doorway of a trailer, and
Yeah, there's a lot of inventiveness. I definitely overanalyzed some of the hidden meanings of these shots, and one of the things was the reoccurring kitchen scene. And I noticed in every kitchen scene, it's just after 11 o'clock. So, in terms of like me trying to piece together, like, okay, what's going on here? Is he the werewolf? I was like, all right, we keep getting these shots of him in the kitchen drinking. So obviously, it could be a metaphor for when he drinks. The monster comes out, and it's near midnight, which is when a full moon would be at like peak height. And then I also, in the back of my head, after I was like, oh, and I wrote it down, I was like, it's always just after 11. I was like, it probably just means they did it in one, like, they shot all those scenes just at that time. Like, the first time you see it, it's 11:07. The last shot you see is like 11:11. It's like, okay, they did an establishing shot, and then they shot the scene.
I think you could also put into like not trying to pick it apart like that and just being like, this is a man living his life and he lives in a small town. He's on a small police force. It's probably when he's off duty.
Yeah,
like he just first gets
routine.
off duty. He's not drinking on the clock yet. So like the first scenes when you see him drinking is like, I just got off duty. I got home. I'm gonna drink. There are definitely some things in here that I think are like really worth analyzing like that too. Like, again, there's a monster out there, but then like as we watch the like decline of John throughout the movie, he like becomes a monster himself, yelling at literally everybody he encounters, drinking heavily, again kind of just like neglecting his daughter, which another hilarious scene too is like, and he's talking to her just being like, hey, like, the second murder happened. He's like, I just want, do you have that? You'll never need it, but do you have that pepper spray I gave you for
communion?
She's like, yeah, it's a weird gift to give somebody. He's like, I know, but
yeah, not that you'll need it, but find it and keep it on you at all times.
Yeah. But one of my favorite things in that scene too is like, he starts to psychoanalyze him. I was like, do you think that maybe this is like, your mother left and if you do this, you'll prove her wrong? No, I thought we were talking about your homework. What do you
Yeah, there's a lot of a lot of the most emotionally poignant scenes happen between him and his daughter.
Or him and his dad. I think a lot of times too.
Yeah, but it's not really like, it's interesting because with him and his dad, it's him trying to bridge a gap between him and his dad. With his daughter, vicious cycle.
Yeah.
With his daughter, it's his daughter trying to bridge that emotional gap and him not really connecting with it. I think the most difficult scenes to watch happens between him and his daughter later in the movie, which I imagine we'll talk about it because it is it's tough to watch.
Which Jim Cummings is good for that also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All these things are going on. Second murder occurs. We have another new character. It's a woman in a diner with her child, and immediately I know she's gonna die or something horrible is gonna happen to her, because what they do with all the characters who are gonna die very subtly is you get a shot of them directly in the middle, usually not paying attention to the camera, and then they look up to the camera and then go back to regular activity. It's pretty subtle, and most of the time it's done like in a way that it feels natural. But yeah, I was like, oh, well, she's gonna die. And what the scene does is somebody walks in, but you don't see their face. They're nondescript. They're always they're talking to this woman out of shot.
Yeah, you see like a hoodie and jeans and like that's it.
He's talking to her about all these, what could be just, your normal
small talk.
Small talk. He's like, oh, your daughter's so pretty. And she's like, oh, thank you. And he's like, oh, I used to work at the elementary school. She's like, oh, that's nice. And then he starts saying things like, that car you have, I've been seeing ads for it. And she's like, why does he know what car I drove or that I drove here? And he keeps making these weird comments. And then she's eventually like, she's like, oh, there's onions on my sandwich. Hold on a sec. And she goes up and she's like, I have to call the police. And that's where the townspeople really get established as almost a character of their own.
Yeah.
Obviously, the townspeople all want to help figure out what's going on, but they all do so in the worst way possible.
Yeah. Again, this kind of being like cop movie, but anti-cop movie. Like, you really get from the cops' perspectives of like at least two good cops that are like trying to do their job as much as they can. And it's not that people aren't being like cooperative, but they're just being shitty.
Yeah.
Like, even when somebody putting up a sign at a grocery store, she's like, hey, can you take that part down? And he's like, I don't get to do this. Like,
Yeah, and the sign says like, stop the wolf man of Snow Hollow, say something, see something. And she's like, I like the second part.
yeah.
Can you take down the first part? And he's like, well, I don't decide it. And she's like, oh, well, that's a nice car you got there. It's a shame it has expired tags.
Yeah.
And he's just like, all right, I'll take it down.
Yeah. Like you said, they want to help, and like, it's like, yeah, we put something up but at the same time, it's like, if the cops are like, no, it's like,
Well, and also in the same vein, I think earlier in the film, they're doing like the news coverage, and they go to someone like an interview, and he's in his car, and he's just like, they better find out who this is, or I'm done paying taxes.
yeah. Yeah.
That's not how that works. And it's like, we get people being upset and their kind of refusal to assist in that way, but it's not helpful and it doesn't serve anything.
They're like, yeah, we're again cooperating, but it's not without something else to say. Like, no matter what, it's like, you guys are assholes. And at the same time, though, like I said, with the two being like good cops, John is also like ends up getting fed up with all the other cops that he's working with. And at one point, he says like, oh, you want people to actually like the cops? Do better police work. Like, you're part of the problem. And there's a couple of times when he's literally just reaming out his team, yelling at them. And like I said, like, there's a lot of hysterical meltdowns in this. One scene or so, he's dusting for fingerprints, and he's just like, there's nothing here. He's just like, just keep doing your job. Do your job. Like, you have anything better to do today? This is what you're doing.
Yeah, they find out like someone's calling from like a specific number, so they're like, all right, let's find out where that number is. And yeah, he's like, yeah, there's nothing here. And he's like, well, take the whole thing. And he's like, all right. And he's like, just do your job. Just do it. Do you have anything else to do today? Then do your job. And the heart of the movie, again, the people not doing what they should do. There's the scene with forensics examining one of the murder.
It was the coroner, like the examiner, right?
Well, they call him forensics.
Okay.
He walks in and he's like freaking out because it's a brutal murder. And he's like, is there anything that we can go off of? Is there hair? Is there blood? And the coroner's like, there's a lot of blood, but we can't do anything about it. He's like, this is your job. Like, don't tell me you can't do your job. And the coroner's like, well, you're a cop. Find him. There's this moment where it almost seems like John has a breakthrough. He kind of falls back and he's like, all right, I'm sorry. I'm a father. It's
after another hysterical like conflict scene too, because the guy's smacking in his face, just like, you get the suspects, I'd examine bodies, that's your job. And John just looks right at him, it just slaps him in the face, and it just turns into this like his whole team pulling him away from him.
Yeah, and he's like, sorry, I'm a father. And the idea is like, whatever this is, werewolf or man, is targeting women, and he has a daughter. He's obviously worried about her. And it goes to show, like, okay, maybe something is breaking through. Like, he's being vulnerable in that moment. And the coroner's just like, no, you're not. Again, if we're talking about like the rules people play, everybody should be doing their job. If no one's doing their job, then all of these like horrible things happen. But then in the same regard, he's failing in his role as a son, a father, a cop, all these different things. So as much as he wants to get angry at everybody else for what he would probably say is like gross negligence, he is as equally at fault for a lot of things.
I think like there's things that he's so spot on about as like a cop and doing his like due diligence though. Even when they are investigating the third murder scene, when we see the third murder scene happen, which is the girl, not only the girl, but her daughter as well.
The woman from the diner.
Yeah, the woman from the diner and her daughter. We see the scene where they're like driving. I'm presuming at this point it's home from the police department. Because she's wearing the same red ribbon in her hair. Like, everything is like, presumably
it's all the same day.
Yeah, and this is where you start to think like too, like, if you weren't sure that it wasn't a werewolf, there's a clear like indication here, because there's a handprint, like a bloody handprint on a deer carcass that he drug out in the road in order to stop the vehicle. And when you see the deer carcass the next time, there's a square the size of like a hand cut out.
That's because it was a poacher.
Yeah. So, and that's the part that like, it's so funny to me at that point too. And he's yelling at his, somebody who works for him. Cause he's just like, why? He's like, obviously he left something behind. Why else would he do that? He's like, well, maybe it was he didn't have any tags. He's, oh, that's real funny. Walks him next to the corpse. He goes, I'm going to sit down here and you tell me it was a hunter that didn't have any tags. And he says the same thing. He's just, you're a bad police officer. You should have went to computer technology.
Yeah. I think this is also where we get introduced to the movie's red herring, which I don't get why they did. It's a double-sided coin for me because I don't understand why they did it. And I think it was almost a bad decision. And then also there's a weird like subcontext to it. Throughout the movie, there's these scenes of like a faceless man. First time we see him, he's smoking meth. The next time we see him, he's shooting heroin. Mm-hmm. And then the third time we see him, he's burning a body in a pile of branches.
Yeah, just like a bunch of foliage.
So it starts off showing the woman's body in the pile he's about to burn. It pulls out and it shows that he has a wolf tattoo on his arm. And it's so easy to go, okay, well, that's the most suspicious man in the world right now.
I think that is why this is in this movie to begin with, because they're pointing it out as a red herring, right? And what ends up happening is, you know, the third murder, it all culminates into like, eventually they think that's the guy, which you pointed out. And it wasn't even the cops that declared it. It was that the coroner. He's like, he's got this, it's here, it was this close to this. Like, my 6-year-old daughter could have figured this out. Like, how did you guys not? And that's a very point, like the point of contention in this where, like you said, like he's failing as a cop. And that is, I think, just in there to be like a slap in his face, like to come back to reality almost.
Yeah, I guess as a whole, in context, I'm fine with it. It just, I think if it wasn't there, you could have the scene where it's like, well, we found the guy, and it's just somebody that you weren't even like, you didn't see.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter because
they showed him to us. Like the fact that they showed him to us before kind of to me makes it like, that's not the guy. I guess like going into it either way, like you said, they either just drop the character in like this was the guy, or have that character be more prevalent as like, oh, I can see how it was that guy.
Yeah, because it really is just drug addict who lives in a trailer with what looks like a wolf dog.
Yeah.
But the thing that I was like, you know what, I guess I'll accept it, is the implication is, well, it's not even an outright implication. The subcontext of that character is they're freaking out about this wolfman murdering people, but this random guy murdered a woman and then burned her body.
Yeah.
So it's like all of this stuff is going on and everyone's freaking out about it and it's this huge deal, but underneath their noses, this man has killed and burned a woman.
They didn't even find it until, I guess, somebody called in the fact that he died.
Yeah, because they showed him
overdoses on heroin and.
Yeah, I don't know. I could have done without that. It's not the biggest criticism in the world. I accept it.
Yeah.
But still.
We kind of like fast forwarded a little bit there, but the whole like the hunt scene where.
I called it Full Moon Mobilization Squad.
Yeah. That's a good one. That should have been the operation name. But again, we see the sheriff who, again, is even in worse health. Like, because at this point, it's 4 months from the start of the movie when they're like, he has a heart murmur and he won't go to the doctor for it. And you see the scene and it's basically him just like rallying the troops. Like, this is what we're going to do. And I think that's also like a clear distinction also between John and his father is like Sheriff Hadley is so good at talking to people. Yeah. Like he can, like, he knows what to say no matter what. And John is like, comes off flat and deadpan and people are like, what an ass. Like, but Sheriff Hadley's giving this speech. This is what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. Says like one of the funniest old person things to me is because I could just hear like any old person say it. He's like, and I'd ask y'all to pray for me right now, but I won't because of the lawyers. John and Julie are like very subtly like holding him up while he's giving this speech. Like they're holding his arms and like
Yeah.
everybody else leaves and he immediately like loses strength in his legs and like has to sit down. And he wanted to go out on this hunt. And at this point, John's just like, no, that's it. You're retired. I don't care. You're not leaving that chair because you can't. And he goes out and asks the receptionist to like call an ambulance. And this is a very like touching scene because he's like, you could tell he doesn't want to leave whatsoever.
Two things. One, her name is Carla.
Carla.
Put
yeah.
respect on
my
her
bad.
name.
I couldn't remember the character's name. I almost called her Sharon.
It is Carla. That is the only character he emotionally connects to. And she's only in 2 scenes.
Carla? Yeah.
Yeah. He helps his dad sit down, and then he goes, I'm going to go have Carla call an ambulance. He's on the verge of tears, and he's swearing at her. He's riled up, not because he's angry, but he can't process
He doesn't know what to do. He doesn't, yeah.
And he's like, I'm going to need you to call an ambulance. Don't tell anyone. Like, make sure he's okay. Make sure, like, he gets an ambulance. He gets where he needs to go find. And she's just like, it's okay.
Yeah.
I will handle it. And it's the only time it's the only person who's there for him and he's vulnerable with, and he makes an emotional connection with. And there's another scene with her later that's also very touching.
Yeah.
But yeah, so full moon mobilization squad, cut to his daughter talking to her boyfriend on the phone. Here we go. She's in the middle of the frame. She looks at the camera. Well, she's going to die, I guess. But what happens is her and her boyfriend meet up, are making out in the truck, and they get attacked by the werewolf. But thankfully, John is right there. And one of the most visually hilarious scenes is he pulls up to them getting attacked, and he does a drive-by with a shotgun.
But at the point also though, he's so determined. It's such a 180. Like once he got out of the precinct, because he was so like afraid to leave his dad. But once he's out there, he's so determined. And I feel like it's because in his mind, you know, my dad's in such poor health. If I go out there and I don't get this guy, it's for nothing right now. If I left him and something bad were to happen, it's for nothing.
Which, very funny contrast.
Yeah, because he didn't even realize that was his daughter. He's like shooting and chasing this thing, and then he hears her say "Dad," and he like turns around, and then he runs up to her, but he's like, "What the fuck are you doing here? Like, I can't be worried about you right now." And I don't think he meant it as like I don't care what's going on.
Well, his exact quote is, "I can't worry about you right now. I'm on the clock."
Yeah, I know, but I don't think he knows how to talk to people. Also, is the other thing.
No,
like,
well, the other thing, and this is where it gets so hard to like him in this scene, because he says, "I can't worry about you right now. I'm on the clock," and then he also goes, "What's your mother gonna think of me?"
Yeah, dude. Like you're out here breaking curfew, making out with a guy in a truck, and when there's a murder around, what's your mom gonna say about me? And that's when she gets like just fed up. Like she's like, you didn't even ask me if I'm okay. It's when she says what you said earlier, like, for the past 17 years, I've just been staring at the back of your head. Go to another conference. You've never said good job, great job, or anything. And she just gets in his car and says, take me to the hospital. Your daughter's bleeding from her skull.
Yeah, and then that's when her and who would be her grandfather,
Yeah, Sheriff Hadley
are in the same room. This is one of the first times you see John step up as a dad. Because he does such a weird cop thing, and he gets her fingerprint so he can open her phone to presumably get the address of her boyfriend, and he goes to his house to beat him up while he's sleeping.
I'm trying, like, I have no idea what's tied around his face at this point too.
It's just like a t-shirt.
Yeah, but it's like so like weirdly like wrapped and like not covering anything, and he was so bad at sneaking in that like you just cut to her boyfriend laying in bed in the dark, and you just hear his mom screaming. It's like, who are you? What are you doing here?
Yeah, and this is like the difference between, this is where one of the first times you see the difference between him and like a normal character almost, because the mom is freaking out. He goes into the boyfriend's room to beat him up. She pepper sprays him. He pulls down his t-shirt off that's covering his face.
Yeah, she realizes who he is.
Yeah, and she has this moment where it's like, what did you do that caused your girlfriend's cop dad to come here to beat you up, and she's like freaking out on him. Meanwhile, he goes to their kitchen and pours milk all over his face.
It's to neutralize the pepper spray. But...
Yeah, but then immediately after, really good like transition scene, because it goes from him with milk all over his face looking disheveled to him coming into the hospital room and looking horrible.
Yeah, he's like, eyes are just like
Sunken
brown
in.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and he's putting his uniform back on.
Yeah, and he goes to his daughter and he's like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And it turns out while he was doing this fatherly duty.
This is another mirror though to like the cafe scene whenever the second murder happened. They're like John. He's like, what? And then he's like, John. And he's like, oh. You might catch it if you're paying very close attention, but he walks right past his father's bed to his daughter, and she said, "Dad." Well, when he walks in, she goes, "Dad," and then he's like, "Oh, what, are you all right?" And she's like, "No," and like gets more stern at this point. He's like, "Dad," and he just like slowly looks over, and the bed's empty.
Which, subtly, she said, "No, Dad."
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I don't think that was. It could have been.
He now has no dad. He falls apart proper. He is drinking again. He is horrible. Every scene you see from this point, he is drinking.
I think there was a scene earlier that shows how heavily he's drinking before this too, and it's even before the full moon mobilization squad. But he's literally just. It's after the third murder. He starts like really pounding beers. And then he doesn't have the six pack he has left. And then you see him in the bathroom chugging mouthwash at that point. Like at this point, he's just like, I need to get drunk.
Yeah, he drinks the mouthwash, and then he's in his kitchen, and it just it passes out. His hand opens the oven door. He falls on the oven door. The glass shatters, and then he falls onto the ground. It feels like the nap time scene from Uncle Daycare.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, because it's such a real fall. Like,
yeah.
No, and I was going to say that too. Like, it's one of the most realistic looking like drunk falls I've ever seen, because he's standing on, like you said, and then his like head hits the microwave, and then he goes down the rest of the way. I don't know why I didn't put that together, but it's like one of the most realistic looking drunk falls that you'll ever see.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know what Uncle Daycare is, go look that up. But yeah, this is also where he's drinking. He's drinking on the job. And the second scene with Carla, where he is drinking in the office of the police station, smoking a vape too. And Carla comes in and she's like, "Hey, you're parked in the middle of the street." And he's like, "Oh, I got an hour of sleep. And when I woke up, I thought my dad was going to be there." And it's really like, it's tough. It's hard to watch. And then she's like, "I'm going to move your car." And he's like, "Yeah, I bet you wouldn't want me to do it." And she's just like, "No, I bet I wouldn't." And it's, again, she's the only character that really shows something towards him.
Like kind of sympathy.
And allows him to be vulnerable.
I wanted to touch on, like, obviously he's been losing sleep too, because he said, like, I haven't even slept an hour. And he's like, I was in here corner. And but there's other aspects too where it's like showing that he's been losing sleep. And this kind of rewind a little bit when he goes to the library and researching werewolves at this point. He's like, all right. And I think more so it's not to be like, maybe it's a real werewolf, but like, maybe I can find out something to put myself in the mind of the person who's pretending to be a werewolf.
Is there a pattern?
Yeah. But he falls asleep, and that's whenever we get the nightmare that I talked about, where he's like, he's seeing the father yell at him at the funeral again. And behind the father, he sees Bran, the first murder victim. And then he sees I think he sees the second one too.
Yeah, he sees everyone who's died at that point.
And then he like starts to like walk back into the room, and then sees the murder scene from the third one, and like gets woken up by the I love
librarian.
This. Yeah, it's such a funny scene too, because he's like, "John," and he just like wakes up and screaming. He's like, "Oh, fuck." It's like freaking out. And he's like, "You fell asleep?" He's like, "Yeah, well, I'm awake now." "You're lucky it was me. If that was any other member of my team, this probably could have ended in a shooting." And then we have a dead Ray.
Well, funniest line, and this is if a cop tells you to pull all the spooky books, don't like that.
Don't surprise him.
Yeah.
Like,
Don't scare him.
but he gets woken up because he's like, there were people trying to talk to you on your radio. He's like, I didn't know what to do. And he's like, oh, thank you. But then they go to the other place where Liz worked. And that's another thing, too, that kind of like led to like, oh, it's this guy. He used the payphone and was calling her at her job. And like, you could tell clearly maybe he knew her somehow and was like kind of like stalking her. But he's like very creepily talking about him. He's like, yeah, I just need to look at like toner prices for
My business.
Yeah. And then another like thing that was just hilarious, and like these are all during parts when he's drinking heavily and losing sleep. They're like, who pays your phone bills? And he just takes the whole phone, like rips everything and like wraps it up. And he goes, and you're not going to tell anybody about this because if we don't catch a guy, it's your fault.
Yeah.
Those are two of the funniest scenes in the movie to me in general. Like some of the funniest lines. The lady's just so confused. She's like, what the like, how's it going to be my fault? And everyone's just, don't worry about it.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the point where the meth guy, they think he's the killer. John is, at this point, like, he failed. He didn't actually catch the guy. Like, they got him, but it wasn't him. And his partner, Julia, says, you win even if the other guy hits the 8-ball in.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's pretty insightful. They got him. That's all that matters. At this point, he's kind of resigned, and he starts, it's New Year, and instead of going to like a party or having some kind of celebration, he's like, I'm going to go give back all this evidence that we collected to the family members.
That scene, it was actually, there's a part that they made him cut from it. Apparently in the original cut, that message didn't really get through to him. And she like puts her hand on his thigh and like says all that stuff. And then he looks, I was like, and he said it was supposed to be a funny line, but like it didn't come off that way. And he's like, oh, and you can also just get your hand off my thigh so I could leave. Like, but they cut that because they were just like, if you leave that in there, like the girl who's been like more of a voice of reason because she's held it together throughout this whole thing while dealing with everything that you're dealing with, is like reaching out to you and being like also vulnerable and trying to open you up. And you just like, and she cares about him too. Like Julie very obviously cares about John throughout this whole film. And like for you to just be like that towards her, they're like, nobody's gonna like your character and this movie's gonna like fall.
Yeah, it becomes a less redeeming like scene overall.
Yeah,
where he's resigned, and not literally, like he's emotionally resigned, and she's like, hold your head up.
Sorry, I also want to, I think this is after what I was thinking was probably the hardest scene to watch in this, because before they catch the guy, and his father dies. His daughter comes home the one day, and he's just like covered in this powder, and she's freaking out. She's like, "What happened to you?" And he's like, "Well," he's like, I'm fine." And it says all like, I forget what he says from the car. She's like, "You crash your car?" And the funniest thing also is like, "No, I tried to leave the station. And I clipped my headlights off the column, and I just got so angry that I just drove as fast as I could into it."
Yeah, that is it's very funny. Well, like it's not even funny. It's funny because he's like trying to downplay it.
Yeah, she's like, "You crashed your car?" He's like, "No, I did it on purpose."
Yeah, he's like, "It's not that big a deal." Yeah, and then that devolves into like one of the most difficult to watch scenes where she's trying to get him to bed, him being drunk, and he's in a bed, like he's having a breakdown about his dad, and she's like, "Everything's gonna be fine. Just go to bed. You're just depressed." And he's like, I don't need a parent. And it's like,
yeah,
I think that's what this is all about.
It's such a real, like, emotionally visceral scene like that. It gets you in the gut, like really, really hard, where it's just like, no matter what you say, it could get through to him. And like, even at that point, like getting into the two, like is all this just culminating into like, are these the real, like, she's afraid of him at this point too. And she tells him that she's like, you are scaring me. Like
yeah, and then he whips
the water bottle
at the mirror. Yeah.
Well, because and he says before that, he's saying my father's face. And I think at that point, like that's all he sees when he's looking at himself, and he's pissed at that. And like it's such a like a just real scene. It was just like everybody's viewpoints on it, emotions.
Yeah, in a horror movie, that's kind of the scariest scene.
Yeah.
After that, he spends New Year's Eve giving evidence back to family members of victims of the crime, and this is where the movie starts to wind down and then also hits its climax. So you get the sense that he's lost. He doesn't know what to do. His dad died. His daughter is leaving for college soon, and he failed to catch the guy. So he's just giving all this stuff back, and then he stumbles upon the taxidermy. Knocks on the door. Taxidermy guy answers. He's like, "Hey, I got some evidence I got to give back to you. You just got to sign it." And he's like, "Oh, why don't you come in?" And they're talking, and this is where it's very blatant. We're actually talking to a suspicious fella. He has all these alcohol bottles. John's like, oh, he asked him like,
"Can I spill something in your coffee?"
Yeah, can I spill something in your coffee? And John's just like, I would love that.
Yeah.
And he sees all these alcohol containers, and he's just like, oh, is your wife away for the weekend? And the guy's like, I'm not married. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. And the guy's just like, yeah, she couldn't hack it. And it's like, oh, that was a very suspicious way to say that.
Did you see his reaction whenever he said he wasn't married? Like, he's like, kind of seemed shocked. Did you realize why?
I had some thoughts.
He's in the movie in multiple different scenes.
Mm.
In the very first murder,
is he the cabin owner?
Yeah, and he's like, my wife is what am I going to tell my wife about? So
I honestly, I saw him and I kept thinking like, is that the same guy? But then I was also like, I imagine that town would just be filled with people that look like that, because it's just a kind of bald guy with a beard who's tall.
Yeah, but that's him. So like, and that's again like John picks up on things, and like clearly it's something he remembered, because whenever he's like, I'm not married, he was just like, but then another time too, when they're questioning all the town folk, he's bitching about them too. And he still has his longer hair and a beard, but like, yeah, he's there like multiple times throughout the movie, and so he did pick up on that, right? And that's whenever he really starts getting suspicious.
He starts answering a question. He's like, how's your daughter? And he's like, oh, she's fine. She's got gymnastics and she's going to school for like a scholarship. And it's like he flipped the two words because he's thinking, it's like, she's going to school for gymnastics, she got a scholarship. He just starts sucking his teeth, and he's like, I'm gonna leave now. And then as he's leaving, he's like, oh no, I gotta go back. And he's like, hey, something you said caught me, stand up like the full way. And that's when it's like, okay, this is the wolf guy. It's this really, really tall guy.
He's taller than the door.
Yeah,
like,
he's freakishly tall.
Yeah.
And they get into a chase scene. He breaks down the door. He starts chasing him through the house, and the killer stabs John in the belly and then pulls him up a wall. And in that moment, I'm like, he is dead.
Yeah.
There is no way he's making it out of this. But police show up because while in the moment when he kind of figures it out that this is the guy, he radios in, they show up. He chases him out the back, and that's when you see the guy. He puts on a wolf suit. It was a man. He was dressed as a wolf, and he was using taxidermy equipment to murder these women.
Julie was also kind of figuring this out, like, while John was there, because Jimmy Tatro, or not Jimmy Tatro, that's the actor, PJ calls Julie and was like, hey, you left some stuff here, I wanted to send it back. He's like, yeah, this weird like sewing thing, and she was like, that wasn't supposed to be in there. But she starts piecing it together as well. So she was already on her way there whenever he calls it in.
Yeah, she's like in her PJs.
Yeah, because she was at home when he called, because she left the card there when she went to visit to try to give them the evidence earlier.
Yeah.
So he called her card to be like, hey, we're moving. You left some stuff here. We wanted to send it back to you.
So there's a chase through the woods, and again, John has a fight in the woods with Werewolf Man. And what happens, Wolfman in the tussle gunshot lets off. Wolfman's down, pan over. It's Julie shot him, and John hops up, pulls out his gun, and shoots Wolfman. He empties his clip into his face.
Yeah, he shoots him like 4 or 5 times straight into his face. But this is also a call back to another thing PJ said.
Yeah, PJ says, when you find him, don't arrest him.
Yeah.
Kill him. Shoot him in the face until you can see the ground.
Yeah.
So he's dead. Essentially, kind of the resolve to the movie. My note, I said John shoots him, all caps, because he just empties the clip. And then I just wrote, New Year, new me. Because it's New Year's. You see the fireworks go off. That's kind of what distracts the Wolfman right before he gets shot.
They do throw you through kind of a ringer, too, because right after that happens, John collapses. And, like, the next scene just cuts, and they're moving Jenna into her college dorm.
Yeah.
And, like, it's Julie moving her in. They're, like, talking for a while. John's nowhere to be seen. It kind of alludes, like, maybe he died for a second, but then he shows up in the doorway. Like, it just seems like he was kind of, like, anxious about seeing her off.
Yeah. And one of the other big themes is control. He sees his daughter off. He's like, we don't have to talk about this right now, but I put something in your dresser drawer, for yourself, like, be careful. And she's like, ooh, Dad, go away. So she looks in her drawer after he leaves, and there's prophylactics. And she's like, all right, maybe my dad's chill, I guess. But then she looks down again, and it's not explicit what is in there, but she looks up and kind of has a horrified look on her face. And I don't know if you picked up on it, because there's a very, very subtle scene earlier where you realize what he did. What do you think is in the drawer?
I mean, I think, like, in my brain, like, well, what would you use to keep it? It'd be a gun.
It's a gun.
Yeah, okay.
Earlier, when he's kind of having a breakdown, he pulls a pair of pants out of evidence, and it's a really ornate belt with a gun on it. And you see, as he's leaving the campus, it's that belt, and he's like putting the belt back on. So the idea is he took it off to give her the gun, and then he's putting it back on. But then as they're leaving, like, a bunch of other college kids walk by, and they're like, do you see all the gymnastics girls just moved in? Total babes. And he stops, and he's like, I can't do anything. This is out of my control. I can't. It's not even so much as, like, I can't fulfill my fatherly duty, but it's like, this is a situation I have to accept that she is in control of her life. I cannot watch over her.
The pants and the belt and the gun, it came out of an evidence bag, but I'm pretty sure that those were all his dad's. Like, because it's after he passes. To the way that he pulled it out and looked at it and everything, like, I'm pretty sure those were all his dad's, because it's like immediately after he dies that scene happens.
That could be it. I didn't catch that, but that could be. But yeah, and that's the end of the movie. I watched it twice last night.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You liked it? Liked it that much?
So I think it's good. So one of the questions I asked you was, why isn't this 4 hours long? And I was being intentionally misleading, because along with watching it twice, I like it. It's a good movie. It is a movie that is 84 minutes long. There's a lot. Like, it is in the same vein with, like, old, like, comedies like Airplane. It's, for movies like that, it's a joke a minute. This movie, there's really not a lot of wasted space. Things are happening so frequently, and as I was, like, jotting down notes, I felt like I was missing something, so I was like, I'm gonna watch it again.
Yeah.
It's a quick movie. I'll watch it again. Yeah, why isn't it 4 hours long? I feel like if this was anything but a low-budget independent movie, it would probably be at least 2.5 hours, where there's more of an established love interest. There's more dramatic scenes between him and his father, and meth guy is more fleshed out.
Yeah.
That would almost be a disservice to the film. I think it works decently. Like, I read one criticism of it where the second half is kind of rushed. I disagree to some point.
I think the pacing throughout it's perfect. And, like, I thought what I was reading into that question, whenever he says, like, why isn't this 4 hours long? One is, like, I thought, like, oh, he really liked it. But the other part, too, it's just like you said, so much happens in it. you could have like watched the movie and just been like, oh, like it didn't feel like a long movie. But if pacing's done properly, movies don't feel wrong or like long. And like this one, it does have like really good pacing. And I think it is because it does kind of just like jump like month to month on like these full moon-esque nights with like maybe having a little snippet in between of just like the going ons that between or around surrounding them. It could have been a longer movie. I don't think if it was a longer movie, I do have confidence that Jim Cummings can craft it as longer and still make it feel like put together and like it didn't lose pacing in it.
Yeah, I don't know. I appreciate that it is the length it is.
It's a perfect runtime for it. Like 94 minutes, I believe, is the overall runtime, and
84.
like 84.
It's an hour and 24 minutes.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine being like, oh, I wanted that movie to be longer. I wanted to see more. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's a satisfying conclusion. Everything gets kind of wrapped up.
All in all, reviews, like reading people write about like they're pretty polarizing. You either love Jim Cummings' work or you hate it.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I would like to dramatically read a user review for The Wolf of Snow Hollow.
What website did you pull it from?
This is from r/horror
Okay,
on
Reddit. I
reddit.com.
wonder if it's the same one I read.
It is because when you Google Wolf of Snow Hollow, it's one of the first links.
Yeah.
By user King of Squirrels.
Yep.
I found it nearly unwatchable. It gave me student film vibes. It would have been salvageable if it hadn't been for the lead actor. He's playing a neurotic cop, but his performance is so unnatural. He has like 7 screaming meltdowns for no reason. And I think the thing that I saw is the general audiences probably don't flock to it, but like critics loved it.
It's got 90% on Rotten Tomatoes.
6.2 IMDb, 90% Rotten Tomatoes, 3.3 Letterboxd. A writer for Roger Ebert's website gave it 4.5 or 3.5 stars. I think it's just if you go into it, it was ironic because it's on r/horror. If you go into it thinking of it as a horror film, you're not gonna like it.
I was on that one Reddit post for way too long whenever I was reading it, and like I just kept getting madder and madder at reading it too. Like, did you read it before you or after you watched it? I'd imagine.
I didn't.
You definitely would read it afterwards. But like for him to be like, oh, he has several screaming like meltdowns for no reason. It's like you're really not grasping what the underlying. They're not even that underlying. What the most tonal shifts of this movie are. The actual underlying thing is that it's a werewolf movie. Like it's not really even as like we got into. It's more of like a serial killer mystery. Like he wrote this after, I'm probably gonna say the name wrong because it's a J and I can't remember if it's John or James, but he was watching Mindhunter and reading Douglas's novels. I'm just gonna say Douglas, his last name, but he's the guy that worked with the FBI. His recordings from like working with people in Quantico are what inspired Silence of the Lamb. He got the inspiration of this from serial killer mysteries. You know, what's another way to kind of make it like even more of a mystery? It's like, and kind of make it funny. And it's just like having kind of like inept cops being like, it's a werewolf. It's like just making it into this situation that it's not by having cops be stupid. To him, he was like, that's just like one of the funniest things to me. And like, it's written more as a family drama comedy set around cops and like this crazy case that they are working on. Calling it horror, which is typically what it's labeled as, I think does it a disservice more. If anything, I'd call it a thriller.
It falls in line with movies like Hereditary to a very different degree.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Hereditary is a horror movie.
It's tense. It's tense throughout a lot of it.
It's a family drama.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is more of, it's like a case study of a dysfunctional family while a werewolf murder is going on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I liked it. I would watch it again. It made me more interested in his films generally. I think it has its issues. Again, the red herring stuff with the meth guy just didn't really strike me. But outside of that, Jim Cummings is a really likable guy. I think he's a good actor. I think he does well with his style where it's this very awkward, like dry, deadpan humor. I think he does really well, and he has a I think he has a really particular niche that he fills that made me want to watch other stuff that he's made.
Going into it again, like the Reddit post, like it feels so off base to be like he's such a horrible actor. It was unwatchable. Like,
he's not. He's definitely he's awkward. He's not a bad actor. It's just like it's almost like movies like Killing of a Sacred Deer, or The Lobster, where it's intentionally written like that. You can't say they're acting poorly because it's meant to come off as that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I liked it.
And I think a lot of his talent, especially with this one, like I think he's a really good director. And if he edited this whole thing himself, like the transitions, the kind of like mini montages and the blending of scenes, like those were really, really good. The cinematography, like it's a very, very beautifully and well-made film on top of everything else. I always like, it's not worth arguing with people on Reddit over things like that, but also it's just like, you can just not like the movie. You don't have to come on here and like drag somebody like a writer and director about something. Like it's just, if you didn't like it, it wasn't for you.
Yeah, it's just a bad take. But,
Yeah.
you know, we all enjoyed The Hunchback of Sleepy Hollow. Yeah, I'd say I'd recommend it. It's a tough sell, mostly just because there's a barrier for entry and just how awkward it is. But I think it's enjoyable for most people probably.
I would definitely say that if I were going to be like introduce, which I did it backwards from what I'm about to say now, but if I was going to introduce somebody to like Jim Cummings, I'd be like, watch The Wolf of Snow Hollow. If you like it, watch Thunder Road.
Yeah.
You have more of an idea of what to expect going into that.
Yeah.
That way, but.
All right. Episode 2. What are we covering next?
That's up to you.
That it is. You know what? I'm not going to say.
All right.
Or am I?
Well, you should in case. Well, maybe not but I'd need to watch it.
Watch it? Question mark.
Oh, listen to it.
Bum, bum, bum. Stick around. Or don't.
Yeah.
Kill us while wearing a wolf suit.
That would be fun.
Later.
Later.